Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds Weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Hey Patrick, we're back after a bit of a break, but seems like different time, different day, and even different place, I suppose.
Yeah, coming to you live from the wonderful Black Forest in Germany.
Indeed, indeed. Quite
How are you liking this part
a
of Europe?
nice place. Very nice, I have to say. Uh, don't know if all of it is coming through in my background, but it's a beautiful part of Germany and Europe, especially this time of the year.
Yeah, I think underrated somehow. Very famous, but underrated somehow. Picturesque, hilly, nice forest, great for hiking.
hmm Speaking about hiking, Patrick, right? Uh, you, You know what there was this really interesting set of news pieces I came across the last few days, and incredibly, one was more extreme as a prediction than the other. Uh, in the beginning, I thought, hey, this must be like a spoof or some sort of joke, but it kept
Mm.
coming up more and more often from some very credible people. And so where it started was, um, I guess all of us know Walmart. So there was this discussion going on in, I believe, some investor call about how this new wonder drug Ozempic is really affecting purchase of food products and so on.
Mm.
For those of you who don't know, uh, uh, Ozempic is claimed to be this drug which helps with weight loss and so on. And incredibly, that then led a lot of people to start speculating on what else could be the ramifications of Ozempic consumption. So there are people who started predicting that overall, and I'm talking worldwide, and keep in mind, Ozempic right now is just being used by a relatively small proportion of people in the US. But
Hmm.
worldwide, we'll go through a dramatic food deflation, a decrease in food consumption, which I guess, okay, I mean, that is a prediction to make, but it didn't stop there. It didn't stop there, Patrick. So
Mm.
then there was this prediction made that airlines will become really profitable now, right? So airlines is a really great industry to invest in. Can you guess why that would be the case, Patrick?
So that sounds like a crazy second order prediction. I don't know, is it because they think that because people eat less, they are lighter, and that's why the airline uses less kerosene?
Exactly, less fuel, and therefore airlines the cost of serving goes down dramatically, and apparently airlines
Right.
become much more profitable. And the claim is, hey, now is the time to jump into airline stocks. So I was like, okay, that is quite the jump, right, from a Walmart observation to recommendations to buy airline stocks. And I was like, hang
Wow.
on, have we have we seen something like this play out in the last few years, right? Um, Made me wonder if all the predictions made about, hey, these are the different models you jump into during the AI boom. In the past, we've had a similar thing with either EVs or
Hmm.
I think depending on how far back we go, there's similar stuff going on with cannabis, so many other industries.
Mm.
Right now, we're in the midst of the AI boom, and it really makes you wonder, is all of this legit? How much should we as investors lean into these kinds of observations and predictions, or how much as founders, whether you're running an existing business or thinking of what the next big thing you should be working on? Do you read all of this and go, hey, I should really jump on this hype train? Or, I mean, how would you deal with it?
So just to be clear, right? So we're a podcast about the technology in the real world. So you and I, we have no clue about healthcare, pharma, uh, all these things. So this is not about Ozempic, right? So the discussion is about, hey, you see people in the finance industry make second, third order predictions based on a pharmaceutical product coming out and what it will do to where tech sectors or where in which fundamental sectors people ought to invest. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think what you and I want to discuss here is, okay, so if you're now a founder, if you're a VC investor, how do we approach predictions versus observations and how we use them in our own decisions to build a company, decisions to partner with companies, right? So first of all, my first reaction is that this, I mean, in the 80s, it was yoga. Sorry, not yoga,
Mm-hmm.
gymnastics was a real trend, right? I mean, there was all these
Yeah.
gymnastics videos and gymnastics brands. And I mean, I don't know. I was a kid in the 80s, but is it that back then people were predicting, hey, it's such a big trend now, everybody's getting lean,
Yeah.
we're gonna eat less, and by the way, car manufacturers are gonna be more profitable because cars need to be don't have to be that big and have the big engines anymore, right?
Yeah.
So I'm making light of this situation because I honestly cannot take these things seriously, and here's why. A lot of people approach when you're a VC investor, it happens that a lot of people approach you and ask you about predictions because somehow there's this notion that people think, yeah, VCs, because they see so much innovation play out over the years, if they do their job long enough, they become really good predictors. No,
Mm-hmm.
people, no. The best way to lose money as a VC is to make predictions. Why? Because you're stacking assumptions on assumptions on assumptions. You're building an assumption tower. And once one of these assumptions breaks, your entire investment thesis is done for, and your thesis will not play out. The job of a VC is not to predict. The job of a VC is to
Yeah.
observe what is happening in the here and now as fundamental shifts, first principles shifts. And so if I apply that now to the Ozempic uh, theater, I struggle to see the fundamental shift, but I will acknowledge that it's not my sector. So I struggle
Mm-hmm.
maybe because I don't know this sector
Yeah.
well enough, and I don't care about that sector. But if I translate that now into the sector that you, me, Fundamental, our founders, and the audience care about, the real world, what are the fundamental shifts that we're observing? Like that's how I'm approaching things, and that's how I think founders that are on their second, third, fourth company are approaching things. They pick topics where they see fundamental shifts that are almost too hard to turn around, like a running train that you see leaving the train station that will just keep going. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's the type of things as a founder where if you've built a first company and you're doing the second one, that's what you're betting on.
Yeah. I mean, so the way I like to think about it is whether it is in an ongoing business or a market trend, all of us make predictions, of course. If an assumption is or a favorable factor is an enabler or a tailwind, as we like to call it, where it all it does is it changes the expected growth rate, right? Or it changes the expected top line or margin favorably, or as it enhances it. That's the sort of assumption I would be comfortable making. When
Mm-hmm.
it comes down to something where the entire viability of the model, it completely hinges on the existence of a certain condition, that's where I would say that, in my opinion, is a risk too far to take. And it's not at that point, I would say it's probably not a viable, or in my opinion, even a venture backable business. That's more of a gamble or a hope that that one assumption holds true over the
Right.
next 5, 10 years. And if that assumption
I think
disappears, you're toast. Yeah.
I think great founders approach it exactly that way, is that extremely comfortable taking technology risk, but extremely uncomfortable taking market risk. So
Hmm.
that's now tying that back to the fundamental shifts. If your fundamental shift is just a hype, and that's your observation, right? So coming back to observations versus predictions, is that fundamental shift just looks like one, it's just a hype, Ozempic potentially,
Hmm.
then that's a market bet, and you don't want to take a market bet.
Yeah.
Whereas if your
Yeah.
observation is that the fundamental shift is a real fundamental shift, it's a first principle shift, it's a train that has left the train station and it will keep going and it will not turn around, that's a great market bet because you're operating under certainty that this shift is happening. As a founder, what you want to bet on is stuff you
Mm-hmm.
control, and you want to avoid stuff that you don't control. Like you can never avoid competition. You can never avoid um, certain market uncertainty, like in 20 years time frame. But you want to minimize the
Yeah.
stuff that you don't control and maximize the stuff that you control, like technology risk. Like that. That's how you should approach it.
Mm-hmm.
But Shub, let me ask you. So against that
Yeah.
framework, like so we're in architecture, engineering, construction, supply chains, blue collar, 3D, and design. That's our spaces that you and I and Fundamental cover. What are the fundamental
Mm-hmm.
shifts uh, that you're seeing where you say, hey, that's actually not a hype topic?
Yeah. I think we're seeing quite a few, some of which we've spoken about in earlier episodes. There's some fundamental shifts which I think more or less apply to all the geographic markets we cover. And I think some apply more intensely or more strongly in specific markets. So we've spoken at length about the workforce problem, for instance, like
Indeed.
depending on which market we cover, either there's a workforce shortage or a workforce surplus, which obviously pairs with the skilling aspect or the quality aspect of. Uh, I think it's an incredible opportunity. We've spoken about it at length and in passing in previous episodes, but I mean, I just have to hammer home, I suppose, that it's a tremendous opportunity. We have backed a few firms doing it, but
Hmm.
very eager to back more around the world. I mean, I think
Agreed.
there's some more as
Yeah,
well.
for
I'm sure what, yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, so for me, I think the fundamental shift, so workforce, definitely one of them. There's a cash crunch in the construction supply chains,
Mm-hmm.
and the smaller you are, the further upstream as a subcontractor you sit, the more you feel this cash delays where the supply, typically construction supply chains are financed intra the supply chain, not necessarily from outside, which means that
Yeah.
general contractors extend credit to contractors, to materials manufacturers extend trade credit, etc. So that cash crunch is becoming more of a cash crunch, and so we love
Mm-hmm.
solutions that address that fundamental shift that is ongoing.
Yeah.
So that's another one. Third one would be, again, we've talked about this at length, is the cross-border uh,
Mm-hmm.
opportunity in organizing the supply chains of materials, but also of labor, coming back to workforce, for the
Indeed.
construction markets that need those materials and labors. I think that's another very exciting topic. And then I don't
Yeah.
know, I mean, energetic renovation, Shoop.
Yeah. Indeed. But hey, I want to pick your brain on something in particular that I think uh, all of us at Fundamental have been looking for when it comes to a very specific piece in cross-border supply chains. It's is this what seems like a real dearth in power infrastructure. So what have you
Look,
been
I
seeing
mean,
in that space?
I think that's another very fundamental shift that is where the train will not turn around, is that
Hmm.
um, the power infrastructure, even the heating infrastructure that we have in
Hmm.
most parts of the world needs significant upgrading. The I will hold back personal opinion on whether EVs are good or bad for um, how we think about the planet of the
Hmm.
future, but the fact is that EVs are like that train has left the station, right? And so what it does to the grid stability in most
Hmm.
of the countries is actually, for most people that don't spend a lot of time in that. I come from the energy sector. I studied energy management. I did wind and solar M&A. I worked for one of the world's largest utilities for many years. I know that space. The grid infrastructure is at an absolutely terrible time upcoming, and so the construction element
Hmm.
to this energy infrastructure, that's a very, depending on your worldview, I like to think positive and optimistic. It's a very, very big opportunity.
Yeah.
But Shub, where do we get all the transformers from?
Not from many of the Western markets, it seems like, given what we're seeing. Seems like even very large, very prominent utility firms apparently seem to need a waiting time of as much as 3 to 5 years in some cases, seems like, right? So we're talking
What?
stuff like Stuff like they're running out of power cables, running out of transformers, running out of switchboards, for instance, and the components needed to make that. It's quite incredible.
Mm.
And I mean, but by the way, people who might be listening to this might be wondering, hey, are we, hinging all of these assumptions and the shortages based on what may be like a short-term hype on EVs? So I'm in agreement with
No,
you.
no,
I
no.
think the EV story has left the station. I think there's actually a lot more going on than meets the eye at first. So it's quite fascinating. The interesting thing is, in most parts of the world, the grid, as we know it, is kind of strategically designed, including where it's laid out, where all the transformers are set, where the cables go, both subsurface as well as above ground, in terms of their proximity to power, the traditional thermal power infrastructure, right? The interesting thing is, as if we also hold the assumption that more and more of the world will switch to alternative sources, and what I mean specifically by alternative is non-coal based or non-fossil fuel based power plants.
Hmm.
In some countries, of course, that is anyway the minority already, but let's say in most of the world it isn't. So as we switch more and more to that, you actually need to create, in some cases, maybe even a new power grid to work parallelly and to integrate with the old power grid to bring other renewable sources of power generation
Mm.
into the grid to augment that supply.
So now you're upending 100 years of infrastructure design philosophy, right? So let's briefly compartmentalize what we're saying from this fundamental shift. So there's materials and components that will be significantly missing to actually make the construction of this infrastructure feasible. And power transformers is a key component that needs to be sourced
Mm-hmm.
cross-border. Number one. Number two, for 100 years, most parts of the world have designed power grids in a certain way. So it was not a design challenge anymore. You kept going, and the rate of upgrading, the rate of changing, and thus the rate of redesigning it very, very low. That's changing now.
Mm-hmm.
And so with it is changing also what you're pointing out. Potentially, we need alternative design options in some
Indeed.
parts. And so that also creates an opportunity for founders that create design software as well as
Mm-hmm.
generative AI to actually help with the redesign of this energy infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
in the most efficient way. What's the most efficient way? Well, from a construction perspective, historically we have said is let's dig up the least dirt. That is one aspect to it. But another one is, given how short we are of materials, rare earths, and the reallocation, reorganization of global supply chains, the most
Yeah.
efficient path can also be the one where you minimize the amount of rare earths that you will have to put in place and what you need for your construction and infrastructure project. That's the design problem.
Yeah. Indeed. Indeed. Yeah. I mean, it's. I think there's so much opportunity because so we have spoken in the past about how cross-border supply chains, just how complex they are, both in terms of the different nodes from which you can source, the different nodes they could feed into, the various freight and delivery options, for instance. And that comes obviously with lead times, working capital, the cost implications, so on and so forth. I wonder if the power infrastructure, because it comes from a time when in most economies the power infrastructure was more or less designed and put in place, at least at a core level, several decades ago, if not even earlier.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
still stuck in the past, stuck way in the past, or much further back in the past than we realize. Say, for example, with how buildings are designed and constructed and for which materials are sourced for.
Indeed. So yeah, I think that's so. Let's bring this full circle. We're discussing the real fundamental shifts and not the hype BS
Indeed.
that is going on
Yeah.
around construction and the AEC industry. We've mentioned workforce, we've mentioned the cash crunch, we've mentioned cross-border, the reorganization of supply chains. With it connected, we've now mentioned the construction of energy infrastructure, which will keep us busy for decades. Like that's how fundamental this shift is going to be.
Yeah.
I want to throw in energetic renovation. That's a
Hmm.
fundamental shift that like that train is not turning around. And I think
Yeah.
finally there's also when we haven't mentioned AI enough yet on this podcast. You and I were
I
absolute
mean, you
fanboys
did throw
of
in
AI.
generative AI. I mean, I think if it's one of several assumptions, I guess I'll live with it.
So what's interesting about that one for me is that you and I we discussed at some point, is AI actually a fundamental shift? So on a foundational level, maybe you could see it that way, but us covering the real world, the construction tech world, and all the other sectors that we cover, is I don't think that's how you should look at it, because it in itself doesn't develop utility if you think of the
Hmm.
vertical applications. So when I think of fundamental shifts, I think of the utility level, not the technology level, right? And so
Hmm.
yes, AI unlocks a lot of things, but the fundamental shift happens on the utility level. And one of those levels where embedded AI and sorry, AI embedded in verticalized context will actually lead to a fundamental shift is materials discovery. I think people are not necessarily giving it enough attention how fundamental of a shift that is, because when you think of the whole
Yeah.
redesign of energy infrastructure, energetic renovation, CO2, ESG targets, the ability to actually reflect better material choices in real time when you design renovation or upgrading measures as well as new construction, you cannot take months anymore like we have done it for
Hmm.
decades, where you find these materials, you connect with suppliers, you go back and forth, ping pong, thousands of emails. That is not going to work anymore. So you need to have actually a way to discover materials right when you design the measures or the new construction.
Yeah.
And you need to draw from massive, massive catalogs. People need to understand that in construction, it holds probably one of the biggest SKU catalogs as an industry of any industry out there. It's very easy for just a wholesaler that is even specialized on electrics or on plumbing equipment, even if you're that specialized as a
Hmm.
wholesaler, you will have millions of SKUs in your catalog. So as an architect, as someone that designs an energetic renovation or that designs a new building, I have literally tens of millions of SKUs to choose from.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic application for AI that covers a fundamental shift, how materials discovery and integrating that in
Hmm.
reorganizing and streamlining the supply chains can be unlocked.
Yeah, I have to totally agree. Um, what I'm hoping for, and cautiously optimistic, is I think the timing is very opportune for firms to use, or young companies, great founders, to actually use AI solutions and layer that in with very practical, pun intended,
Nice.
use
Well done.
cases in, yeah, in real time. And I think we are seeing such examples. I'm glad to report. I mean, obviously, we do have several firms where AI is the be all and end all of what they represent. But I think we are also seeing quite a few companies where they offer a very solid proposition, and AI is allowing them to get ahead in a very practical use case.
I agree. I agree. But the fundamental shift would then always be on like the utility or the market level, in my opinion.
Indeed.
Yeah. One that we didn't
Indeed.
mention, and where I think it will come, and getting the timing right will be difficult for
Hmm.
founders as well as investors, is space construction. That is a fundamental shift that will happen,
Hmm.
well, at some point for sure, but getting that timing prediction right is very difficult, and I'm uncomfortable with it, because part of our job is also observing what is happening here and now. So if it's not yet here and now, then um then it's it's not necessarily the right opportunity for a great founder to bet the next 7 years on just yet. My hunch is that space
Yeah.
construction is going to take off in the next years,
Yeah.
pun, but maybe not just yet. Yeah, so really what we've been discussing is these fundamental shifts, and so how important it is that you observe the present and you don't stack too many assumptions about a wishful world in 10 years in order to pick
Hmm.
the right spaces to bet yourself on. Like that's what serial founders do. That's what VCs like to do. And so we've discussed these several very fundamental shifts in construction, but observing the present is what you need to do that. Now let's actually observe the
Yeah.
present, Shub. And so you and I want to
Mm-hmm.
talk about the state of construction tech in October
Yeah.
2023. I brought a ton of numbers that I published on LinkedIn, but numbers are just one
Mm-hmm.
half of the coin. Let's perhaps actually start with like a qualitative assessment. You're in the market, Shub. You're in the market every
Mm-hmm.
day. You talk to hundreds of founding teams every day. You talk to construction market participants. Like you're immersed. What is your sense of the state of construction tech in October 23?
So it's interesting. So look, on one hand, I feel like the worst is behind us. And what I mean by the worst is the most pessimistic phase where investors are less excited or less willing to put themselves on the line, do more rounds, especially anything later than a seed or pre-seed. So say starting from Series A. I think we are past the worst phase. Uh, but on the other hand, are we anywhere close to what I would consider equilibrium or a positive phase? Except for AI, I would say no, not yet. So,
Mm,
and in sometimes it also feels like a weird divide when you look at AI or a relatively small set of spaces, um, and what else is happening in other spaces and markets. Having said that, I do have a sense that construction in general is firstly holding up better than other spaces, given when we hear stuff
mm,
from several of our VC friends. It has held up better, as in
interesting.
the drop has been less severe than other spaces, and I feel like the recovery is also in general uh, either at or above market right now. As in, the recovery is slightly faster than the indexed average of all sectors. And just to be
Very
clear, what I
interesting.
mean by recovery is not, just to be clear, what I mean by recovery is not that the revenues had dropped or profit pools had dropped and then they're rebounding. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring more to a sense of optimism in the market in terms of how much capital is willing to be deployed.
Got it.
What are you seeing,
I think I
Patrick?
can prove the yeah, I think I can prove the resilience that you're pointing out and the almost counter-cyclical nature of construction tech to the overall total venture market, actually with numbers. So let me run you through a few numbers as of October 2023. So first of all, construction tech for the first time in history, because
Mm-hmm.
there's a pattern between 3 to 4 years, right? And construction
Mm-hmm.
is exactly on track. That's what logistics tech did. That's what travel tech did. That's what fintech did. That's what prop tech did. Um, and so this pattern holds true across venture sectors. That's an accelerating growth of VC funding because existing VC funding
Mm-hmm.
creates great projects and great projects suck in more money, and that's why it's accelerating. It's a universal pattern of venture, and Constru-Tech is exactly on that path with 30 billion now after about 2 years since we were at 10 billion, right? So that's um, just in general giving you a sense of the scale we're at. But what I did was I ran the numbers and I took out the crazy year 2021. Everybody in venture knows that 2021
Mm-hmm.
was an outlier. If you want to say it's neutral, if
Yeah.
you want to say it with a little bit more judgment, you could also call it like a crazy year in which money was deployed that
Mm-hmm.
perhaps should not have been deployed. So I took out 2021 because
Yeah.
it doesn't give us any validity in data. I took that one out and I compared the 6 quarters in construction tech before 2021
Mm-hmm.
with the 6 quarters since 2021, which is basically going into Q2 2023. And so when I compare that, so we have 160% more funding after 2021 than we had before
Mm-hmm.
2021, which means Constru-Tech is
Interesting.
actually accelerated in growing than it was before 2021. And also in terms of the quarterly
Mm-hmm.
peak. So how much of money came in one specific quarter before 2021 and after were 3 times higher in the peak since 2021 than they were
Nice.
before, right? And even the most recent quarter, Q3 versus Q4 2020, so Q3 23 versus Q4 2020, Q3 23 is 10%
Mm-hmm.
higher than it was before 2021. So Constru-Tech is actually on an accelerating growth path, and the 30 billion that we just crossed, that was not powered primarily by the crazy 2021. It's actually powered by growth since 2021. And when you compare that to the total venture market, it's day and night. The total venture market on the 6 quarters before 21 and after is actually down 23%. The quarterly peak is down 10%,
Mm-hmm.
and the Q4 2020 versus Q3 2023 is down 40%. So that's day and night to what we're seeing in construction tech. The median round sizes are going up in Constru-Tech while they are shrinking in total venture. And final point here,
Mm-hmm.
final data point. So this is a derivative of what we're saying. It's a logical conclusion, but I want to point it out to people. So because Constru-Tech is accelerated growing while total venture is shrinking, the contribution of Constru-Tech to the total venture ecosystem has almost quadrupled. We're now almost 4 times more important to total venture as a sector than we were before 2021.
That's fascinating. That's incredible. I mean, although having said that, I mean, I guess it's I would treat it also as we're just getting closer to parity. I would say we're still not at parity, given that construction represents 9-10% of the GDP in most economies, or I think even the
Indeed.
global economy. Uh, so I think we're still way off that representation. But that's awesome. And I think the next few years will only further solidify this trend. You know, in the
Yeah, I'm very
analysis
excited
that
about it. And again, I mean, we've been talking a lot about serial founders. And if you're a serial
Mhm.
founder and looking to found your next gig, I think Constru-Tech offers a lot of very interesting fundamental shifts and tailwinds.
Absolutely. You know, the other interesting thing I found in the analysis you had shared from, I believe it was earlier this week, about how I think you mentioned that there's 17 unicorns right now, or as of today in Constru-Tech, or have been 17
Right.
unicorns, of which I believe 10 were outside the US, which I thought was really interesting and extremely counterintuitive to everyone in the, probably most people, or maybe even everyone out there in the ecosystem.
I mean, if you look at the airtime construction tech gets globally across different media, that media wants you to believe that it's 100% United States. That is
Yeah,
not the case. In fact,
indeed.
um,
Indeed.
I'm right now working on an article for next week in my AEC-VC series, which is actually double
Hmm.
clicking on these 17 unicorns. And so I'm clustering them into a few models that have found more appreciation. One of them is the one-stop shop procurement, one-stop shop marketplace solutions
Hmm.
in Constru-Tech. Within that, there's 6 unicorns out of those 17.
Hmm.
Okay, one of
Okay.
which is US. 5 are not US.
Isn't that interesting? Okay.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Which also means, by the way, there's still opportunity on the table for the US and
Yeah.
learnings that can be transferred
Yeah.
by a global investor that knows these models from other continents.
Indeed. Nice. I mean,
That's right.
if you think about it, if you think very top down, even in the whole world of venture, if you zoomed out, say 10, 15 years ago, I think more like 15 years ago, we probably had again a disproportionately high representation of the US in the overall share of
Hmm.
VC funding or investments into technology firms. And don't get me wrong, obviously the US is overwhelmingly the largest market into which such funding goes in. But
Hmm.
I see a very interesting pattern where, again, we're kind of normalizing or finding parity in terms of the relative proportions, where lots of other markets have emerged in the last 10, 15 years, some of which have emerged as very significant hubs of investment growth, new unicorns emerging, etc. And I think construction is emerging as one of those spaces where I think that because how late or quote unquote late construction tech has emerged relative to other sectors,
Mhm.
maybe we'll see
Yep.
a very stark effect where we'll see a very global representation from day one in how the unicorns emerge and keep proliferating.
I think it's already happening. And in fact, another side data point just to perhaps demonstrate the global diversification of venture even more. So Cambridge Associates, which is one of the premier um, data providers for fund returns that benchmark VC funds and private equity funds, has released in their latest
Mm-hmm.
update the numbers that European venture funds over the last years have returned a higher IRR and distributions than the US venture equivalents, and Asian
Oh,
even higher, plus the fundraising of new funds in 2023 is the highest in Asia, not in the United States. So again, that's not like we're singing the swan song for the United States, not by a long shot. It is the most important market. It is extremely exciting, and it's one of the, not just pillars, it's one of the drivers of construction tech.
yeah,
But the global diversification of venture, and especially also in construction tech, that is a real thing. And as a founder, as well as co-investor to us, I think it benefits you to recognize that shift.
100%. Yeah,
Good
indeed.
talking to you, Ship. Anything in
I
your
think if
calendar for
we,
next week?
yeah, I like how you prefaced it with anything. So, let me check here. I mean, again, just catching up with some of our portfolio companies, doing a few reviews, etc. Also, quite honestly, digging into some of the themes we spoke about earlier today. So, for example, providing components, cross-border supply chains for providing components for the power infrastructure in Western markets, which I think is a very pressing theme. So, really looking to build up the knowledge, our knowledge in that space, and also digging into specific opportunities.
Amazing. Yeah, for me,
What's on your?
uh, yeah, right now we are having several very interesting and exciting diligences ongoing. I haven't been excited by venture projects over the summer a whole lot, but right now there's several projects and founder teams that we're discussing with that I'm actually really excited about. One is in the space of causal AI for
Hmm.
for manufacturing problems tied closely to construction manufacturing. That is a space and a team that I like a lot. Another one is a design software company that helps utilities design energy infrastructure and plan the construction for that. That's something that
Interesting.
yeah,
Hmm.
that I'm quite interested in as well. So several projects. There's one project that I don't want to talk about yet. So, but you know that's ongoing
Okay,
and super
very
excited about driving those forward.
nice, excellent. Oh, this was fun.
Indeed, coming to you from the Black Forest.
Yeah, the Black Forest edition of the Practical Nerds.
Nice. Well, look, sir, I wish us both safe travels back and a wonderful
Yeah,
weekend.
wonderful weekend to you, Patrick.
Cheers.
Bye bye.